Good morning, everyone. As you heard, I'm Chris Polte. I'm the immediate past president of NCEDA, former chair, three-time chair of the Legislative Committee. So this is a topic that I just absolutely love and appreciate what we've been able to accomplish. And then also my paying job is the executive director of Monroe Union County Economic Development Commission. I'll be the MC, but appreciate you giving us some of your valuable time today as we look to provide some information around legislation and what we're trying to do with our advocacy program. So we're happy to have you with us. Before starting the program, I would like to acknowledge our annual sponsors. Their logos are now going to show up on the screen. And these companies and organizations support every component of NCEDA's mission that's ever growing and all the body of programs that we have. Want to thank all these sponsors for their generous support as it allows us to produce webinars like this one that benefit our membership and even goes beyond the membership. As we approach the legislative day on May 8th, and register if you have not, go to nceda.org to do that. This topic is very timely. So our Legislative 101 webinar will feature an engaging discussion and the importance of legislative advocacy for the economic development community. NCEDA is the voice for North Carolina's economic development activities, and we want to ensure that that voice is heard loudly. And so we utilize the Legislative Committee as well as our exceptional lobbying team at Smith Anderson. Today's webinar will cover a legislative process at the NC General Assembly, tips and tricks on how to build those relationships with your legislators, and a deeper dive into our legislative priorities. We'll wrap up the webinar by discussing the strategic opportunities that we have where you can join us in advocating on behalf of economic development in North Carolina. So today, the webinar will feature Mr. Dave Horn. He manages the government relations practice at Smith Anderson and helps lead our advocacy efforts. Dave has spent nearly 30 years representing clients in North Carolina's General Assembly and other state and local government entities. Then we have our superstars, Ms. Brittany Brady, our NCEDA legislative chair. She's a current board member, and her paying job is the president of Henderson County Partnership for Economic Development. Next, we have Natalie Hawkins. To finish out the dynamic duo there is our vice chair of the legislative committee. She's also a member, and she's getting her paycheck from the Moore County Economic Development Partnership as she serves as their president. So I had the pleasure of chairing this committee, again, like I said, for 3 years, and know the tremendous effort that Brittany and Natalie have put into making this committee so successful. Actually, I'm a little mad at them because they've done a better job than I did, so I really appreciate everything that they have done. So it's now time for me to be quiet and hand this over to who you want to really hear from. So at this point, I will turn it over to Mr. Horn to start the discussion. Welcome, Dave.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you, Liz. And first, I should say thank you to the Economic Development Association. It is our privilege at Smith Anderson to serve as your legislative counsel and lobbyist at the North Carolina General Assembly and before all state agencies. We consider it a privilege because we believe economic development activity is essential to secure a better future for the people of North Carolina. And we're honored to be able to represent an organization that's dedicated to that purpose. Not to mention the fact that you meet a lot of very outgoing and interesting and capable people like those on this webinar. In fact, there are over 50 people on this webinar. And one of the things we like most about economic development is that it's a team sport. That is, every aspect of our economy and every aspect of our government plays an important role in making an economic development program successful. When I reviewed the list of attendees to this webinar, you see utilities across the state represented. course, our economic developers, those that spend their careers or are spending their careers working for sometimes local governments and often private sector entities. The top engineering firms are represented among our attendees. Of course, as I said, our utilities, those involved in transportation, our economic development partnership, and as well our NC Department of Commerce are all represented among those more than 50 very capable professionals involved in economic development across the state and active in the association. So welcome to each of you, and everyone plays an important role in making any economic development program for both state and local governments successful. For 10 years, we represented the regional partnerships, Charlotte, USA, the RTP partnership. This is before the change made by the current leadership in the General Assembly in 2012. But for more than 10 years, we had the privilege of also advocating for funds for the regional partnerships across the state. Some have gone on to become supported solely by local government participation and private sector donations. But during the course of that, we were able to learn a lot about attitudes at the General Assembly about economic development and some of the misconceptions that exist there. For instance, duplication. Some members of the General Assembly believe that there's too much duplication in in economic development. I think that's a misconception because there's so much to do. Every aspect of the place we live, our state, our local communities are important to new companies that are considering expanding here or relocating to North Carolina. And so there's lots of work to do in order to attract those folks. And the competition from other states and other countries now means that we can't afford to miss a single issue when we're competing with other jurisdictions for the decision to be the choice location for a new company or an expansion. So who do we deal with primarily on behalf of the association in its legislative program? It's the North Carolina General Assembly, your elected representatives that whose role is defined by the North Carolina Constitution. There are 50 senators, and Natalie, if you could share your screen, there are 50 senators in our General Assembly, and I might say each and every legislature in each state is unique. They all have their own customs, their own the composition determined by the state constitution, and the rules that govern the activities within the legislature are all unique to all 50 states. So North Carolina has its distinct rules and customs and laws that govern the activities of our General Assembly. We have, unlike some states, our legislature is what is referred to as a citizen legislature. That is, persons serving in the General Assembly are expected to have another job or profession, or either be retired from another job or profession. We do not pay our legislators enough to be full-time legislators, unlike some other states that many of whom are almost as large or larger than North Carolina. But our state is approaching the size of some full-time General Assemblies. California, of course, New York, Massachusetts, and some others are full-time, and they receive salaries that indicate or that are indicative of that obligation. In North Carolina, legislators are paid roughly $14,000 a year. They receive a per diem expense for the days they're in session, and they receive expenses for their travel. And as well as health insurance for themselves. And of course, they can purchase health insurance for their dependents, should they choose to do so. And as you know, that's becoming a beneficial benefit, or even more beneficial each year, it seems, as healthcare costs increase. But nevertheless, that's quite modest compensation. And the composition of our legislature has changed through the years. There was a time when almost a majority of the members of the General Assembly were lawyers. Sessions were much shorter, and the obligations of legislators were much more limited than they are now. But in a state of more than 10 million people, the North Carolina has a much more complicated economy. Problems are more difficult, and a much more diverse population, which increases the obligations of members of the General Assembly. So now we see more retirees in the legislature because the meeting times have grown longer and longer through the years. No longer is there an expectation, or no longer can a legislator be assured that in June or early July, a session's going to end. In fact, we've seen sessions go longer than a year. Just that happened in 2021. And it's not unusual for sessions to drag on beyond even the summer months in these days. So the obligations of legislators have increased significantly. What we've seen in the composition of the General Assembly has changed too. There are fewer lawyers than there used to be. There are 18 lawyers currently serving in the North Carolina House, but there are 37 small business people. 24 members of the House list their occupation as retired. There are working in nonprofits or in a church. There are 10 members of the House in those roles. So most professions are represented, even if it's with only one or two members. For instance, there are only 2 physicians out of the 170 members of the General Assembly. There are 3 that list their full-time occupation in the North Carolina House as farmers. Only 3. That number would have been higher in years gone by. Likewise, in the Senate, you actually see a greater percentage of lawyers. Out of 50 members, there's 16 lawyers, 14 in small business endeavors, and that includes realtors, mortgage bankers, those involved in perhaps their own small business. There's 1 healthcare provider in the entire 50-member Senate, 3 that work in churches or for nonprofits, and 14 in small businesses. So what we do see is in our citizen legislature, many of the people, just like you see in your communities, are represented. There the Constitution designed our General Assembly that way so that we would have access to the life experience that each of these members brings to the General Assembly. The legislature conducts its business through committees. Committees are appointed in the Senate by the President Pro Tem and in the House by the Speaker of the House. The Speaker of the House is elected by the House by majority vote, and then the Speaker appoints all committees, and all committee members serve at the pleasure of the Speaker. As you would expect, the Speaker appoints as chairs and leaders of committees. In most cases, there are a few exceptions, but in most cases, members of the same political party that the Speaker is a member of. And likewise, the same rule applies in the Senate. The Senate and the House each have their own rules. And their proceedings and their handling of bills are governed by the rules adopted by the House and the Senate on their opening day of session, or certainly within the first month of the proceedings of a new General Assembly. And every 2 years, our Constitution requires that all members of the House and the Senate run for re-election should they choose to continue to serve. So every seat in the House and every seat in the Senate is subject to election every 2 years. And you see roughly 20 to 25% of the members of the House and the Senate change each year, or every 2 years when there's a new election. This year, House and Senate members will be running in new legislative districts. Those were redrawn based upon the recent lawsuit that Supreme Court permitted both the House and the Senate to redraw districts after the last redistricting in 2002. So that's basically how our legislature is, the composition of our General Assembly. A couple of points about how it operates, which I think is important. Not all members of the General Assembly have an equal voice in the operation of the legislature. Those that chair committees control which bills are heard in the committees. The rules chairman in the House and the Senate decides to which committees each bill is referred, and whether or not a bill even gets a referral to a committee. That is decided by the rules chairman in consultation with the presiding officer. Those with seniority and with higher majority leaders and minority leaders tend to have more influence on what matters their respective caucuses take up. And caucuses can have a significant influence on the path of a bill and its success. So leaders in those positions have more influence on what the legislature ends up doing and the specifics of any legislation. I see my time has expired. We'll have time for questions later, and I will pass this over to my colleague, Brittany, and look forward to what you have to say, Brittany, about building relationships with your members of the General Assembly.
Yes, thank you so much, Dave. There's a lot to take in when understanding the General Assembly and how the process works. And so one of the things that I was most intimidated about when I started in my position was just developing relationships with elected officials. I think we all feel like these are people that we don't know how to relate to because they're elected and they're leaders. But I had to remind myself that elected officials are people and they want to be respected just the same way we're respected. A few things before we start a walk through the Advocacy 101 piece. Just as a reminder, session is about to start. And so if you haven't contacted your legislator, now is a really great time to do so. And specifically, as Chris mentioned, we hope to see you in Raleigh on May 8th. And so now is a really good time to make that outreach. If you don't know your legislator, you can find their information on the General Assembly website. There's contact information as well as their legislative assistants contact information, but maybe folks in your community or on your board will have a great relationship for you. And another reminder is, as Dave mentioned, every 2 years there's an election process. And so probably every 2 years, there's a good chance you're going to be making new relationships and new contacts in your community. And so be sure that you're doing that. Be sure that you're paying attention. We like to believe that economic development is purple. We work with both sides of the aisle. So pay attention to those primaries, pay attention to what's happening in your community in November. And so when the election is finalized, you know the candidate and you can start that relationship from the get-go. And again, you just want to build that connection, build those people in your community who can help you establish a relationship with your elected officials. All right, Natalie, we'll go ahead and pull up the one-pager. Information is online. You can find it at the NCEDA website under the Advocacy tab, and we will be sending this information out. One of the best ways to meet with your legislator is to meet on your home turf. It's a great opportunity for you to just get to know them, establish that relationship, and show them what you do. One of the easiest ways to do this is to include them to all of your events, include them on your distribution list. So if you have a newsletter that goes out, be sure that they're receiving that newsletter or your annual report or your annual event. If you have a partner meeting, be sure to include them. That is a great way for them to hear that message over and over and over. And again, build relationships with other people who support economic development in your community. We have this Take Your Legislator to Work initiative that we've been advertising before the session. But guess what? You can do that even when the session starts. Your legislators will be back at home at some point in time. So maybe you can still show them your favorite site, or you can walk them through your business development efforts, or you can just take them out to coffee. So don't feel like you have to finish up meeting on turf before session starts. They still come home. In fact, I had a representative once and he said, Brittany, I don't expect you to drive 4 hours to Raleigh to meet with me. I'm home every Friday. This is my favorite coffee shop. I'm happy to meet there. So know that that is an opportunity. Another great opportunity right now is Natalie's going to talk about our priorities with NCEDA Select Sites was a top priority for us. We want to see product development thrive. And so if you were one of the 55 communities that submitted an application, or you were one of the 30 communities that got a visit, or you're just a community that has a product development need, that is a great way to build that connection by something that was in the budget, something that was funded, that we're working through, and how that can impact your community. So don't forget about taking those opportunities to connect the dots, if you will, while your legislators are at home. One thing that our organization does is we actually host an elected officials event. We open it up for all of our elected officials, from our local folks all the way up to federal, to come in for a meeting that's just open for our public officials. And we just do an economic development 101. We share with them what is important to our organization. We share with them some things that might be happening with the association. And just to give them, they all hear the same words, they all understand what's going on. It's a forum that they can ask questions that, you know, a private member is not going to hear. It's just a really good opportunity to get everybody on the same page. So again, I would encourage something like that as well, just to make sure that your elected officials are keyed into economic development as much as possible. And then keep that cadence. So we see the timing there. There's odd years, there's even years, know when they're in long session or short session. Just kind of keep that rhythm with them. Of course, when they're in Raleigh, it's another great time to connect. So again, you might have a legislator who's like, don't make the trip to Raleigh, I'm so busy. I have a representative and she's like, please let me know every time you're in Raleigh, because I never want to eat dinner alone and I'd love to see somebody from our hometown. And so just know that relationship and what's going to be there. But know that when they're in session, if you've never walked the halls of the General Assembly, you've never been in the legislative building, it can be busy and it can be chaos. And if you've never waited outside the hall and felt like you're, stood up for a first date, you've never really truly experienced what it's like to work with your legislator, because they're busy people. But don't take offense to that. Know that it is important, first of all, to set that meeting. Make sure that you have got that time on their calendar. You really only need 15 to 30 minutes, but be flexible with that. You might chat with their legislative assistant during that time, or walk through your priorities with them in the event your legislator can't make it to that meeting when you're in session. But just know that it is a different rhythm and a different meeting opportunity when they are in session in Raleigh. As mentioned, it's important to know their legislative assistant, or if they have other folks on their staff, that's who you're going to schedule the appointment with. You can find that information on the General Assembly website, and that's a good person to have that contact with. Again, your legislators are busy. You're not the only person trying to get on their calendar, so it's important to build that relationship. And again, just be friendly and flexible when they're in Raleigh. So whether you're meeting on your home turf or whether you're meeting in Raleigh, make your priorities known. One of my legislators say, "Where's my hot sheet?" Every time we meet, he wants to have a one-pager following up with our meeting. Whether there's no request, again, it's okay to meet with your legislator just to build that relationship, even if there's no request, or there is a request, you want to have that. If you don't have a request, selfish shameless plug for the association right now, you can use our NCEDA priorities as your request. Maybe your community is in good shape right now. You don't have anything specific, but you need that face time. You can pull our priority list from the website. You can take that, you can print it. And again, you can share those examples of how that legislation could impact your community and how our policies impact your community. So feel free to do that. But having your priorities in writing is really important. You can leave it with them after the meeting. You can email and follow up. Again, make sure their staff always has that. If you are making a budget request, if you need something that has a dollar amount, that dollar amount in writing is really important to make sure that they can get it correctly as well. And then you want to follow up. So what happens if you're meeting and all of a sudden you're talking about economic development or a policy or priority that's important to you, and your legislator is just like, not so sure this is something that I believe in. You want to continue to build a compassionate relationship. You want to make it as personal as possible. Again, we are purple people. We work on both sides of the aisles, and we believe that sometimes those differences really help us along. And so, again, politely build your case. Politely explain what you're doing. Don't get offended if they don't agree. They're hearing from lots of people and they have lots of experience. It goes back to that first point of building your network in a community. Do not expect, especially if you're a local developer, that you are going to single-handedly build a relationship with your elected official, because it's going to take a network of people. Maybe your board members have a good relationship with that elected official. Your local elected officials, your county commissioners, your folks in town council also have really, really good relationships with these state elected officials. And so you might lean on them and say, "Hey, I'm trying to work with Senator ABC and he's just not getting what I'm saying. The next time you meet, could you help advocate for us?" The other thing you can do is go to the Board of Elections website, and you can actually see who some funders and donors are supporting your legislators. And you probably will know one of those people. And that's somebody you can pick up the phone and say, "Hey, I know you have a great relationship with Senator ABC. I was hoping the next time you talk that maybe you could encourage them to consider what we're doing." Again, you just want to build that case politely. Keep them informed. If something's happening with that, send them an email, send them a text, call them and say, "I just wanted you to know this is going on with this policy. Could we talk a little bit more about it?" and move through that. You want to keep these relationships ongoing. So again, you don't want to annoy them. They're getting lots of requests. But if you have a project, that's a great way to get your legislators involved. You don't want to give them all the dirty details up front, but as the project progresses and you're feeling good about it, it's good to say, "Hey, we're working on Project Bobcat. It's a $100 million project. We're expecting 100 jobs. I just wanted you to be aware in case we need to advocate for more funding," or "This is just a great opportunity that's happening." Or if there's a project or policy that you've worked with them in the past, again, it's a great opportunity just to keep that in front of them, just to touch base throughout the year. It's just this constant cyclical when they're home, when they're in Raleigh, when there's an election year, just keep that cadence and then follow up. After you've met with them, again, just be polite, professional, follow up, thank them for their time and build that long-term relationship. If you watch our driving development videos, you'll know that Senator Johnson talked about insurance and the importance of insurance. And we all know that we're paying our insurance premium every month. And we need that insurance sometimes, but we don't need it every single day. And that is just like your relationship with your legislators, is that you want to have that baseline. You don't want to call them in the middle of a project and panic. You want them to know what you do. You want them to understand what's going on. And so when they need to hustle and make something happen for you, they're ready to do so. But it's really just building a relationship. It's no different than how you build a relationship with many other peers. You just want to reach out, build that connection, find that common ground. And remember, they work and do so many things. So the more that you can provide gentle touches and education about economic development, it will help them help you in the future. And you'll be able to help them as well. I love when my representatives call me and ask me questions or connect me with people about economic development, because I've become a trusted resource for them. So just keep at it. And again, this resource is available on the website. And I'm going to hand it over to Natalie now to talk about our priorities.
Hey, thank you, Brittany. Appreciate all of that great advice. Actually, today is my senator's birthday, and I've already sent him a text message wishing him happy birthday today. So keep in touch with your legislators, like Brittany said. And also want to say thank you to Dave for that great overview of the General Assembly. I learned a lot of information there about what our composition is of our General Assembly today. So each year, your NCEDA Legislative Committee creates economic development legislative priorities, and we take those to the NCEDA board for their approval. And I want to talk about that here in just a minute. Those legislative priorities are in three key areas: product, people, and posture. And before we talk about what our legislative priorities are for the upcoming short session, I want to first talk about how we determine those priorities. So the first thing we do is we convene the legislative committee in the late fall or early winter. And we do that to review and discuss our prior year's priorities, and then what actions the General Assembly took or didn't take that address those legislative priorities. And then we seek the legislative committee's input on what our priorities should be for the upcoming session. As you know, there are long session years and short session years, as Dave kind of talked about earlier. And in long session years, we typically have bigger asks, if you will, of the General Assembly, given their schedule for adopting a 2-year budget, and of course, the type of legislation that they are authorized to entertain in short session years. So for example, last year we had a long session, right? And we asked the General Assembly, the NCEDA did, we asked for a $100 million non-recurring appropriation to create a competitive grant or loan program for sites that are under 1,000 acres. And while our product development proposal wasn't funded, the General Assembly did allocate funding for the North Carolina Select Site Program at the tune of $10 million, as many of you on this call are aware of. So in terms of how we set those priorities, we're going to convene the legislative committee first, and then we're going to engage our partners to determine what their priorities are as it relates to legislative advocacy. So your legislative committee chairs, as well as NCEDA executive committee members, and then Josh and Dave there at Smith Anderson, we all hold meetings with representatives of our partners, such as a community college system, county and municipal associations, and other organizations to understand what their legislative priorities are and how we might incorporate those priorities into our legislative priorities, or how we can just support them in their advocacy efforts. So we pull the committee together, we meet with our partners, And then your legislative committee chairs and Smith Anderson representatives draft some legislative priorities for the upcoming session. And we do that typically in the winter, like December to February timeframe. And then we reconvene the legislative committee and review those with them. So once the legislative committee approves those legislative priorities, we take those to the NCEDA executive committee for their review and approval. And then once they approve them, we distribute those priorities to you, our members, so that you have the talking points that you need to engage with your legislators. And of course, we do all of this in advance of our annual legislative day, which you've heard about already, which will be held on May 8th this year in Raleigh. And certainly hope to see as many of you there as possible. I'm going to go ahead and pull up our legislative priorities for 2024, and hopefully you can see those there on the screen. As I mentioned, we have those 3 key categories of product, people, and posture, and these are also available on our advocacy page on the NCEDA website, and would encourage you to access this document and other resources that are on that page. I held my Take Your Legislator to Work Day a couple of weeks ago, and I actually distributed this particular document to the legislators that I hosted here in my office. So what I want to do now is I want to run down this list, and I'll start with the first category there, product. So of course, NCEDA continues to advocate for North Carolina's greatest economic need, or site development. And over the years, we have requested state funding, obviously, to help develop those sites. And we do remain steadfast in our belief that all 100 counties should be able to access those resources. So if we'll take a look at the first bullet there, the first bullet, our first priority under product, is really to continue General Assembly support for the select site readiness and the mega site readiness programs. Many of you on the call are probably familiar with those programs. But just wanted to touch base on what those are a little bit. So the Mega Site Readiness Program, as you may know, the General Assembly previously appropriated $100 million to identify mega sites, and EDPNC engaged JLL, and they identified 7 mega sites throughout North Carolina. Concept here is we identify the sites, and then we follow that up with funding for due diligence and, of course, infrastructure expansions and enhancements. This past year, the General Assembly appropriated appropriated $10 million for some due diligence on at least 15 select sites, or sites under 1,000 acres. 2 of those sites have to be under 100 acres, and 7 of them need to be under 500 acres. EDPNC is also managing this program. I know Garrett's on the call. Garrett, thank you for taking care of that for us. And they've engaged Site Selection Group and Thomas Hutton to evaluate those 55 submissions that Brittany mentioned earlier. So that select site readiness program results or outcomes should be here available in the next month or so. And what we are doing here on our legislative priorities is making sure that we are advocating for the General Assembly to continue to make those infrastructure investments in the mega sites and the select sites that are being identified as a result of these 2 programs that the state has previously funded. The second bullet there on your screen is focused on reestablishing the Rural Transformation Grant and continuing funding for the Building Reuse Grant. Those of you who may not be familiar with the Rural Transformation Grant, that was a grant that was created with a $48 million appropriation from the American Rescue Plan Act, or ARPA funds. And what we're advocating for here is that the state of North Carolina appropriate state funding to continue that program once those ARPA funding streams are exhausted. I know we've had the benefit of 2 of our really small communities with less than 4,000 residents in terms of population who have taken advantage of these rural transformation grants, and those are being used for downtown streetscape improvements and sidewalks and park improvements, all things to make our downtowns more vibrant and more suitable for commerce. So we're advocating that those grant programs remain in place and continue to receive funding from the state. If you move down to that headline, workforce innovation, this is our people category. Of course, NCEDA continues to advocate for state funding to ensure that North Carolina has the talent that we need to support industry growth and expansion in the state. And the first bullet there is to support the North Carolina Community College System's Propel NC initiative. And hopefully you've heard about this initiative. If you've not, the North Carolina Community College System is asking the General Assembly for $93 million in recurring appropriations to overhaul the funding formula for community colleges. And that ask is being made to better align funding for current and future workforce development needs in those high demand, high wage fields like healthcare, IT, and the trades and others. So this proposal has received unanimous support from the North Carolina's 58 community college presidents. And this year we've incorporated the community college system's ask into our legislative priorities as a way to advance and support workforce development initiatives across the state, particularly for those high demand occupations that we're seeing. If you take a look at the second bullet there, you can see that we are supporting attainment of credentials, again, for those high demand industries. For example, there's a grant program called the Finish Line Grants that help community college students complete their training if they face unforeseen challenges. And of course, with this priority, we would support the continuance of those types of grants. Obviously, assisting attainment of credentials helps the state reach the My Future NC goal, of course, to have 2 million North Carolinians with a post-secondary degree or credential by 2030. And supporting workforce development and our people is a consistent NCEDA legislative priority. And finally, our third priority here revolves around enhancing North Carolina's competitive posture and ensuring that we have a positive business climate that attracts private investment and jobs to the state. And here our priority is to encourage the General Assembly to fund the SUS Japan conference that's going to be held this fall in Charlotte at the amount of $1 million. If you were at the spring conference in Pinehurst, my hometown, you probably heard the NC Commerce Chief of Staff Marquita Welton mentioned that funding for the SUS conference was one of the Commerce Department's key legislative priorities, because this event does help continue to encourage Japanese investment in North Carolina, as well as support our existing ties with Japan. You may have also seen in the news that Japan's Prime Minister visited North Carolina last week, as of course Japan is our #1 source of foreign direct investment here in North Carolina. To summarize, then, those are our three key legislative priority areas: our product, our people, and our posture. And this year, we're advocating for those three key things, really, right? Continued state investment in product development, continued state investment in our people, and as well as funding for the SUS Japan conference that's going to be held later to reinforce our competitive posture. I hope that you will go to the NCEDA website's advocacy page and go ahead and pull down copies of this one-sheeter that we have here. And again, share those with your legislators, talk with them about what North Carolina's Economic Development Association's legislative priorities are. As I kind of mentioned earlier, of course, you know, our legislative priorities are, differ in long session versus short session years. And as we're going into a short session year, what we see is that we are kind of tweaking our priorities. So this is not the year that we would come with a big, brand new proposal or a big ask. We did that last year, and we believe we've laid the foundation with the legislators in terms of making our organization, our associations need for site development, product development, a high priority with that comprehensive proposal that we submitted last year. So I will reiterate what Brittany said. It's really, really important to have those great relationships with your legislators and make them aware of your community's economic development priorities, but also take that opportunity to make them aware of our association's legislative priorities. And hopefully we've given you the tools and the resources that you need to be able to do that. So with that, I'm going to finish up, and I'm going to encourage anyone that has any questions about the topics that we have discussed here today, if you wouldn't mind to go ahead and look at that Q&A tab there at the bottom of your screen, and you are welcome to post your questions there. Myself and Brittany and Dave, we are all here ready and willing to answer any questions that you may have. And certainly hope that you found the information that we've provided to be helpful to you. I'm not seeing any questions yet, but if you have a question or even a comment would be fine.
Maybe we were thorough, Natalie.
I guess so.
So while we're waiting for any last thoughts, don't forget May 8th, we hope to see you in Raleigh. You can register today for our legislative day. It's brief in the morning. We have about an hour or so at breakfast, and then we encourage you to go meet with your legislators. You should now be equipped with some priorities and how to engage with them. We do have a small reception the night before. So we look forward to seeing you all on May 8th.
Brittany, I was going to say, I've already set up my appointments with my legislators.
There we go. All right, we've got one question. Are our legislators receptive to meeting with private industry professionals also? Absolutely. As I mentioned earlier, it's really important, that we have a network of people. And so if I'm talking to my legislator about economic development and it's just not clicking, and then the next meeting that he has is with the private partner about the importance of economic development, that helps build that relationship and that connection. So absolutely, that's a great opportunity. They're elected, and they're elected by people, and everybody is a person. So you have the opportunity to meet with them.
Great. It looks like we have another question here, I think maybe from Jim Smith, about having bill numbers and sponsors posted to help facilitate discussions. Dave, do you want to take that one?
Sure. And thank you for that suggestion. We haven't done that in the past, but it's certainly something that that we'll consider doing. There are often numerous bills, but that cover the same subject matter. But I understand that request, and I think that's something we can accommodate. So thanks for that suggestion, Jim.
And I'll also share, kind of on that note, NCEDA is really unique in that we are an association with 100 different members focusing on economic development. But if you've been around us long enough, you know that we believe that last session's budget was an economic development powerhouse budget. Was it everything that we as the association requested? No. But our job as the association is to elevate economic development across the board. And so if it's being elevated, then we can certainly celebrate that and champion that. And so, to that point, there might be multiple bills or multiple things going on that might not be exactly what we're asking for, but ultimately are supporting you and your profession. And so know that we understand that this is a little different than other associations who might, see a benefit for all 100 counties. We understand if you're going to meet with your legislators and have an ask that might be slightly different than our ask. At the end of the day, we want you to be successful in economic development.
If I might make one comment, I think it's often many people believe that legislators perhaps understand more things about your job than they actually do. Please don't make that assumption, because what we've discovered through the years in working with legislators is that many know a great deal about their professions, of course, but don't really understand the art of economic development and all of the aspects of a program that make it successful, both in the public and private sectors. They can learn a lot from you. And trust me, I haven't yet met a legislator that's not interested in seeing more jobs, more quality jobs for their community. And they're always interested in how they can help. Some have different views about the appropriate role of the state or local government, but one thing I think they all have in common, and that is they want your economic development programs to be successful, and they want their citizens to have more opportunities for careers and to achieve their potential. So it's you work in an area where legislators want you to be successful, and they want to see your program succeed. So they're eager to learn more about how they can be helpful. And what makes a difference with legislators are actually, I find, and it's true, and I think not only with legislators, but with people too, an illustration about how a program has been successful in your community. Explain to them how a particular grant program made the difference in a company's decision to expand in your community rather than going across the line to Virginia or Tennessee. Explain to them how your program helped connect that certain industries or employers to qualified applicants, either through the community college or through a job training program. Explain to them how grants were instrumental in getting the attention of a company that was considering multiple states, and what really made a difference to that community. One of the companies that we've worked with in our practice told us 10 years ago, what our people want to hear about is what are your public schools like? Can you connect us with can you tell us about public education? Because we don't want to bring our children here without good opportunities. So it's not just grants or just programs, but having knowledge about all aspects of your community that can make you more successful in your job and can make your program more beneficial to your community.
I don't see that we have any other questions in the Q&A box there. So do we want to turn it over to Chris Plate to give us some closing remarks?
Great. Well, guys, thank you so much, Dave, Brittany, Natalie. Really appreciate the insights, the experiences as you talked about, as well as your advice today. That was great. As you can see, the association, you can see why we've been so successful with these people leading the advocacy efforts for our group. So again, thank you so much. Thanks to all that joined us. Your engagement, involvement in NCEDA advocacy strengthens our voice and heightens our efforts. So we encourage you to take what you've learned today and hopefully work with us to build on that to make even a stronger platform for economic development advocacy in our state. Let me again thank our annual sponsors. We could not do this without you, so I do appreciate that so much. We do provide some of the best value to our members compared to any other association. I think that's one of the things we really, one of the reasons why we've grown almost triple since I joined the board 7 years ago. And so with all of that said, we've got some upcoming seminars or webinars, excuse me. One on April 24th is the EDPNC Real Estate Report. I think that would be very interesting to hear about, as well as on April 30th, this EDPNC's Spotlight on International Business Growth. So again, something particularly as we look to the SUSE Japan event coming up in the fall. We also have several in-person networking opportunities across the state. You can head up to the mountains, get a little break from some of the heat that's now starting to show up for our luncheon on April 30th. And as I mentioned earlier, we have our legislative breakfast on May 8th in Raleigh. Also, we'll have a triad area luncheon in High Point on May 22nd. And then the big one, the annual conference, is always a hit in Wilmington from June 25th to 27th. That's where Dan Work and I will be defending our cornhole championship. So at least come for that part. The registration for these will be opening soon. And as you know, the annual conference fills up very quickly, particularly the hotel. So go ahead and start planning for that. Look for more information on all of our great events that we have in the e-newsletter and on the NCEDA's website, nceda.org. So again, thank you so much for being with us today, and I hope everyone has a great rest of the week. Thank you so much.